Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Season 1 has been out for about a week now, and that is plenty of time to figure out what has been working and what isn't. It's a savage world out there, but I've got you covered with the top 4 builds. Normally in these meta reports, I cover the top 5 builds in the current meta, but if I'm being honest, this meta is a bit more top-heavy than others, to the point where I think the top 4 are just much stronger than anything that I could include in the 5th spot, so we'll just focus in on 4 this time. First up, Savage Hunters. This is probably the undisputed best build in the current meta. It benefits from the recent rework to the 4 Savage Alliance, which now provides the attack bonus stacking to all of your heroes, not just the Savage ones. This scales incredibly well with Hunters, who make the bonus attacks as part of their alliance, meaning that they stack it up even faster than normal. The core units here are, of course, the 4 Savages, which have some nice synergies like Druid and Summoner between them. The 2 best Hunters in the game are Medusa and Mirana, but there are a lot of options for a 3rd Hunter. Rounding out the core units is Tidehunter, whose big AoE stun buys a lot of time for your units to ramp up their damage bonus. The most popular units to round out this composition are shown here. Beastmaster and Bristleback are a potent pair in the early game, and if you can rack up a lot of brawny kills, they can scale well into the late game as well. Bristleback can then replace one of the other Savages if you stick with him, but if you don't get this pair going early, you may want to move on to some other options. Windranger is a good early game option to complete 3 Hunters, and she stacks the Savage bonus quite quickly with her fast attacks, but she's outshined by Mirana come the late game. Slardar gives access to Scaled before Medusa comes online, and if you need it against opposing mage compositions that may be messing you up before you can find that Medusa. And finally, my favorite pairing, Drow Ranger and Pudge will complete Hunters, Heartless, and Warriors in this build, while also giving you a strong frontliner. Drow Ranger's aura also scales amazingly well with Savage as it grants bonus attack speed to everybody adjacent to her. For Underlords, this build loves support Hobgin, with Let's Go Crazy providing a huge amount of attack speed increase, which lets you stack the Savage bonus even faster. Alternatively, Enno's all-out attack is a great stun to buy more time for your team, and this is going to be a common theme throughout the video, with all-out attack Enno being very strong. Here's an example positioning. Generally, you want your tanky CC units like Tidehunter and Pudge up front, with your ranged units stacked up around Drow Ranger, if you have one. One consideration here is where the Magnus is placed, since he will prefer to buff the closest ally with his Empower. So if you have a higher star level unit, like let's say a 3-star Tusk or something along those lines, you might want to put that unit closer to the Magnus. So just think about that positioning whenever you're arranging your units. Next up, we have a strong contender for the top of the meta, Spirit Mages. This build was partially empowered by the buff to the Delta Slam ability, getting 25 more damage per hit, and the move from Void Spirit down to tier 4, making him much more accessible in the mid and late game. The key units here are, of course, all 4 Spirits, along with Crystal Maiden and Keeper of the Light. Together, they will give you 3 Mages, 3 Spirits, and 2 Humans to make sure that all of your units can cast quickly. As for additional units, it's just more Spirits. Just seriously, keep on adding more Spirits, the more the better. Ideally, in the late game, if you have your 2 Human Mages, and then every other unit is a Spirit of some sort. With more Spirits means that you have more units to cast more Delta Slams, so you will chain them back to back and completely annihilate your opponent's board. The most important one is Storm Spirit, since he has the shortest cooldown. Ideally, try to get 3 of him, play 2 of them at 2-star and then another one at 1-star. It's generally not worth upgrading Storm Spirit to 3-star, just play multiples. For Underlord choice, Enno's all-out attack will keep enemies in place and buys time for your Spirit cooldowns to come back up. But if you feel like you want some more damage, High Damage Dealer Hobgin is always a great option to pair with Mages, since he deals magic damage on all of his abilities. Positioning of most of your Spirits doesn't matter too terribly much, since they'll be zipping and zapping and leaping around the fight. Make sure to keep Keeper of the Light in a corner to maximize his straight line ability, and if you can scout out your opponent's positioning, like let's say you're in a late game 1v1, you can target the position of your Earth Spirit to line up to silence their key units, like let's say they have a Tidehunter or something like that you don't want to cast. You can get them silenced by putting Earth Spirit right in front of it. Otherwise, just keep them up front somewhere. The third build here is a Knights Healers composition, which is finding its way back into the meta with the return of Luna. The main appeal of this composition is just how tanky and resilient it is. So much healing, so much damage reduction that opponents will really struggle to punch through your lines once you fully assemble this build. It's also very synergistic, with a lot of overlapping alliances between knights, healers, trolls, and heartless. The downside is the lack of CC effects, and very little ways to disrupt your opponent or to reach their key damage dealers, like the Savages have the Hunters on the backline. This build really can't disrupt that or get to them in any meaningful manner. The core units here are pretty much all of the early game knights and then all of the healers, but in reality it's actually pretty flexible. To round out these 6 knights, you will generally want to use Sven, but in the very late game you may find Dragon Knight 2-star and want to swap him in with another dragon like Viper. If you pick up an Ogre Cap early on, that will give you Bloodbound with the Warlock, the Mr. Warlock unit. Ogre Cap is great when placed on Luna or Chaos Knight to increase their carry potential, but it also opens up the possibility of playing Legion Commander. She fits so well into this build since she acts just like a knight thanks to the Champion Alliance. It can deal tons of damage with the Bloodbound and a Demon Alliance, which you naturally are playing, and plus constantly ramping up with duels. If you don't have an Ogre Cap though, don't play Legion Commander. She's really not worth it without the Ogre Cap. And you may not even want to consider running Warlock or Dazzle, just dropping down to 2 healers if you don't find an Ogre Cap. In the late game, if you find Troll Warlord, going up to 4 Trolls may be beneficial along with Witch Doctor, but that's often going to be overkill. Troll Warlord with just the 2 Troll Alliance and a good item can still carry really hard. For your Underlord, you have a strong preference in this build for healing-based Underlords. A Nessex and Enno both provide constant healing output that is amplified by the Healer Alliance. A Nessex has the extra bonus of summoning a Demonic Golem that can give you a little bit of backline access, although not quite as much as some other builds. Jull is quite a bit weaker even in the healing tank version since he only heals adjacent allies, and he's really tricky to position in a knight's composition since Jull wants to be adjacent to your units but knights want to be adjacent to each other, so it just doesn't really work out in practice very well. If you do not get one of these healing Underlords, then you probably don't want all 4 healers, just 2 will be fine, and you can use some other options like Trolls or Warlocks. Here's a pretty typical positioning with Mr. Warlock far up front to act as a sacrifice to empower your Luna, who's wearing an Ogre Cap. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. You've got your melee knights up front, and then the ranged units behind them. And finally, we have one of my favorite builds, Bloodseeker Carry. As the name implies, it revolves around Bloodseeker and letting him carry your team. To that end, he really wants a Stone Hall Cloak. This is definitely the best item for him, which will give him a ton of survivability thanks to all of the kills that he gets. Ogre Cap will also help to empower him by giving you another Bloodbound on your board, and give you another potential carry unit as well if Bloodseeker dies. This build is very weak to stun effects, and especially weak to break effects, since they'll negate Bloodseeker's healing and bonus attack speed. So having a backup carry if Bloodseeker dies is probably a good idea with that Ogre Cap. Then, of course, you have your Bloodbound Sacrifice units, Ogre Magi and Warlock. The most interesting thing about this build is that unlike most builds, it's relatively unit independent. Most of the units are pretty cheap and easy to find, and then plus all of your Sacrifice units can easily be played at 1-star even in the late game. It's much more dependent on getting good items, but when you do get those items, this build is very consistent to place well with. There are some other unit options other than just spamming more Bloodbound Sacrifice units. Legion Commander is probably the most interesting one here. On one hand, she does count as a Bloodbound thanks to the Champion Alliance, but on the other hand, she gains Deadeye from Bloodseeker, which will make her walk slowly between all enemy units trying to target the lowest health one, which of course is constantly changing every second or two. And it'll take her a while to actually get to the attacking part since she's going to be walking so much. It really is frustrating since she does hit so hard when she does attack, and especially with her dual ability, it's just that she doesn't actually get to it very quickly. I try to treat her as a sort of an extra sacrifice unit that has some upside of occasionally one-shotting an enemy as opposed to a primary carry like she is in most builds. So it's really just like an extra, an Ogre Magi with some upside. Otherwise, Luna and Chaos Knight are a good pair to add in. Luna holds the Ogre Cap very well, and if you somehow get 2 caps, put the other one on Chaos Knight. They also have good alliances for Legion Commander, both the Knights and the Demon Alliance. You can also throw in some Brutes along with the Ogre Magi, but generally they're going to be kind of weaker in this strategy. And finally, the Warlock Alliance can help to bail out Bloodseeker if he's not getting those kills quickly enough. Disruptor in particular is great to silence the enemy team, but Necrophos may pair well with Lifestealer if you want some Heartless to shred your opponent's armor, since most of your damage here is physical damage from auto attacks from Bloodseeker. Your Underlord choice here is fairly open, but I personally like Damage Support and Essex. Her attack damage amplification helps a lot with the Bloodbound Alliance, and you have enough single target burst to consistently kill off the enthralled target. Otherwise, Rabid Furball Enno is always a good option. That board-wide stun is just so good. I told you it would be a common theme in these builds with that Rabid Furball version of Enno. In terms of positioning, it really does not matter much for this build. Bloodseekers will always seek out the weakest target, and they move so fast that I just put them in the back to avoid them getting targeted right away. They'll get to their target in time. Your sacrifice units can be spread out up front to make sure that they die quickly and feed your Bloodseekers. Legion Commander can be placed near the front and middle to get her closer to her initial target since she walks so slowly. That does it for the top builds of the current Underlords meta. While there are some other builds out there that do see play from time to time, I don't think that any of them are really on the same level as these four at the moment. Big thanks to all of my channel members. This channel is sponsored by its channel members and by viewers like you. So if you like this content and want to help me continue making it, please do consider supporting by clicking on the join button down below. Channel members enjoy awesome perks like getting early access to guide videos like this one. Extra special thanks to Lord tier channel member John Vise. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you next time.